Your name is not on the seating chart, the bride's mother told me less than 2 hours before my son's wedding. I had already paid $86,400 in vendor deposits, final balances, and quiet emergency fees, but she looked at my wrinkled suit and pointed toward a small table near the service door. You will be more comfortable back there, she said, as if comfort was another word for hidden. The best man was standing close enough to hear every word, and when he saw the folded place card in my hand, he did not look confused. He looked like a man waiting for the right moment to let a room discover what it had chosen not to see. If you've ever been dismissed by people who only measured you by what you wore, what you drove, or what you refused to brag about, stay to the end. This story did not end with me making a scene at a wedding. It ended with one calm truth, turning a room full of proud people very quiet. My name is Henry Whitaker. I am 68 years old, and I spent most of my life as a toolmaker before I owned a small precision parts shop. I never looked rich because I never learned how rich people were supposed to look. I wore the same brown shoes until the soles gave up, drove a 19-year-old truck, and kept my good watches in a drawer because my late wife Ellen used to say a man's hands should tell the truth before his wallet did. Let me back up. Ellen and I started Whitaker Tool out of a rented garage behind a tire shop when our son Evan was 4. I worked days repairing equipment for factories and nights cutting custom parts on machines that shook so hard they rattled coffee cups off the shelf. Ellen kept the books at our kitchen table with a pencil behind her ear, and when a customer finally paid us $1,200 on time, she cried into her sleeve because it meant we could cover payroll before we bought groceries. We were not building a fortune then. We were building a way to sleep without fear. The business grew because I was stubborn about quality and Ellen was honest with numbers. By the time Evan finished high school, we had 27 employees, 3 delivery vans, and contracts with companies that trusted our work more than our name. I never told Evan exactly what we were making because I did not want money to sit between him and his own pride. Ellen agreed. She said, "If he grows up thinking money is a ladder under his feet, he may forget how to stand." So we lived simply, paid our people well, gave quietly to church funds and medical bills, and let our neighbors think the old shop just kept us comfortable. When Ellen got sick, everything changed, and nothing changed. She was diagnosed in February, had surgery in March, and by Thanksgiving she knew what I did not want to admit. One evening she took my hand at the dining table and made me promise 2 things. The first was that I would not let grief turn me bitter. The second was that I would never use money to make Evan love me. A gift is clean only if it can survive being unrecognized, she said. I sold 32% of the company after she passed, then sold the rest 4 years later, and after taxes and investments I had more than $12 million spread across accounts, trusts, and conservative funds. At his engagement party, I brought a small cedar box I had made from a plank. Ellen saved years before. Inside was a handwritten note and the diamond pendant Ellen wore on our 40th anniversary, something she had told me should go to Evan's wife someday. Claire thanked me with a smile that stopped at her teeth. Then she put the box on a side table behind a vase and whispered to Evan, "Maybe don't open handmade things in front of everyone." I heard it because old men who stay quiet often hear more than people think. Evan looked embarrassed, but not for her, for me. Then came the wedding planning dinner. Claire's parents, Denise and Robert, brought binders, color samples, guest estimates, and a confidence that made every choice sound already decided. Evan sat beside Claire, smiling at me as if he hoped I would pass a test nobody had explained. The first number they showed me was $61,000 before flowers, photography, transportation, and what Denise called an elevated guest experience. I asked gently, who was paying for what? Denise folded her hands and said, "Traditionally, the bride's family does the heavy lifting, but we are already carrying a lot of optics here." That word sounded colder than money. Evan cleared his throat. "Dad, we were wondering if you could help with part of it. Not publicly, just behind the scenes." Claire added quickly, "We do not want people asking uncomfortable questions. You understand." I did understand. More than she meant. They wanted my money to have clean hands and no face. I asked how much they needed. Evan stared down at the table. Denise slid a paper toward me. The estimate had grown to $74,500, with a note beside several items reading "sponsor pending." I could have laughed, but Ellen's voice came back to me. "A gift is clean only if it can survive being unrecognized." I said, "I can take care of the wedding vendors directly, if that helps." Claire's shoulders dropped with relief before she remembered to hide it. "That would be generous," Denise said, "and discreet." Discreet is fine, I said. Also, Claire said, choosing each word like she was moving glass, we are keeping the family introduction simple. No speeches from the groom's side. It can get awkward when people ramble. I looked at Evan. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his water glass and said nothing. That silence told me more than any insult could have. I went home that night, opened the folder where Ellen's trust papers sat, and stared at the line she had written on a yellow note years before. Love does not need a podium. Over the next 5 months, I paid invoices as they arrived. The venue required $18,000 down. The caterer asked for $21,300 after the menu tasting. The photographer wanted $16,800. Flowers were $9,750 because Claire changed the palette twice. Every payment went through my family trust, and every receipt came to my attorney, Anita Rhodes. She asked once if I wanted a written acknowledgement from Evan and Claire. I told her no. I said it was a wedding gift, not a lien. I did insist on one thing. Anita added a clause stating that the trust would cover only approved contract amounts and that all add-ons required written consent from the payer of record. People who are careless with gratitude are often careless with invoices too. The approved total settled at $86,400, which was already more than Ellen and I spent on our first house. 2 weeks before the ceremony, I received the final timeline. My name was listed under general family arrival, not immediate family. Claire's father would walk her down the aisle. Evan would walk Denise to her seat. Robert would give the welcome toast. There was no mother of the groom moment, of course, because Ellen was gone, but there was also no place for her memory. I called Evan and asked if he planned to mention his mother during the ceremony. He went quiet. Then he said, "Claire thinks it might make the mood heavy." "Your mother loved weddings," I said. "I know, but it is Claire's day." I looked across the kitchen at Ellen's empty chair. The cushion still held a small, pale mark from where sunlight had worn the fabric. "It is your day too, Evan." He sighed. "Please do not make this harder." I said good night before my voice could betray me. The morning of the wedding, I put on my charcoal suit, the one Ellen had chosen for our anniversary dinner 8 years earlier. I tucked her note into my inside pocket and arrived 90 minutes early. White chairs faced an arch covered in flowers, servers moved like clockwork, and for a moment, I let myself feel proud that I had given my son something lovely. Then Denise found me near the escort card table. She wore silver and carried a clipboard like it had sworn loyalty to her. "Henry," she said. "Small adjustment. We had to move some tables around." She handed me a card with table 17 written on it. I knew the floor plan. Table 17 was near the service door, partly blocked by a column. "I thought immediate family was at table 2, I said. Her smile hardened. "There are only so many prime seats. I am the groom's father." "Of course," she said. "But you are not hosting." I looked at the flowers, the chairs, the glassware, all of it paid for by checks with my trust's name on them. Before I could answer, Claire came out of the bridal suite with a robe over her dress and her phone in her hand. She saw the card and gave Denise a look that meant this had been discussed. Evan appeared behind her, already dressed, handsome and nervous. "Dad," he said, "please do not start anything." Those 5 words did what months of smaller insults had not done. They placed me outside my own son's life and blamed me for noticing. Claire lowered her voice, but not enough. "He paid for the wedding in silence, apparently. And now he wants the best seats. The best man probably knows his name better than half my guests do." The words landed between us. Evan closed his eyes for half a second. Denise whispered, "Claire." But nobody apologized. Nobody corrected it. Nobody looked at me and said I had done more than enough. I felt my pulse in my wrists. I did not shout. I did not cry. I did not tell the room that the flowers, music, plates, linens, and polished floor under their shoes were there, because an old toolmaker had decided to keep a promise to his dead wife. I touched the folded note in my pocket and heard Ellen again. "Love does not need a podium. A gift is clean only if it can survive being unrecognized." So I said, "Table 17 will be fine." That was when Lucas Grant, the best man, stepped forward from near the hallway. Lucas had been Evan's friend since middle school. I remembered him as a skinny boy who ate 4 hot dogs at our backyard cookouts and asked Ellen if she could pack extra cookies for his mother. His mother, Marlene, had worked in my shop's front office after her divorce. Years later, when she needed surgery and had no paid leave left, Ellen and I covered 6 weeks of wages and the hospital balance. We never told Lucas. Marlene must have. Lucas looked at the card in my hand, then at Evan. Mr. Purse. Whitaker is supposed to be at table 2, he said. Claire blinked. We changed that. Then change it back, Lucas said. There was no anger in his voice. That made it stronger. Evan flushed, but Denise stepped between them and said the photographer was waiting. The moment passed outwardly. Inwardly, something in me settled. Not hardened. Settled. There is a difference. At the reception, I sat at table 17 because no one had moved me. My view of the head table was cut in half by a column, but I could see enough. Denise gave a toast about sacrifice. Robert thanked everyone for celebrating what family could build together. Evan looked toward me once, then away. Claire laughed with her bridesmaids shining under the lights I had paid to rent. My dinner arrived lukewarm. A server apologized twice. I told her it was not her fault. Near the end of dinner, Denise approached the band leader and asked for a special announcement thanking the bride's parents for hosting. I watched her hand him a card. Lucas saw it too. He left his seat, spoke quietly to the band leader, and then walked toward me. Mr. Whitaker, he said, bending so I could hear him over the music. I am giving my toast in about 10 minutes. Is there anything you do not want said? I studied his face. What do you know, Lucas? He swallowed. My mom told me enough, and the planner's assistant left the payer packet on the check-in desk this morning. I saw the trust name. I should not have, but I did. This is not your fight, I said. No, he answered, but it is my speech. Tell the truth kindly, I said. Lucas nodded. Before the toast, I made one quiet decision of my own. I stepped into the hallway, called Anita, and left a message. I told her not to release the $250,000 house fund I had planned to give Evan and Claire after the wedding. I asked her to revise it into a 5-year family trust with conditions for both spouses, including financial counseling, no withdrawals without joint approval, and an annual charitable contribution in Ellen's name. I also told her to notify the venue that the trust would not approve any unlisted add-ons from the reception unless I had signed them before the event. The approved balance was paid. The extras were not. That may sound cold, but it was not. The house fund was not a right. It was another gift, and a gift that large can ruin people who have not learned respect. As for the add-ons, I'd already seen 7 new charges appear that week, including a late-night seafood station, extra floral installations, upgraded wine service, and a private car for Denise and Robert. Those charges totaled $22,600. My name had been useful enough for the invoices. It would now be useful enough for the boundaries. When Lucas tapped the microphone, the room quieted. He began with a story about Evan helping him pass algebra, which made people laugh. He spoke about Claire's confidence in Evan's loyalty. Then he paused and looked toward the back of the room where I sat half hidden by the column. There is someone here tonight who taught me what quiet generosity looks like, he said. Most of you know him as Evan's father, Henry Whitaker. My family knows him as the man who helped my mother when she was scared and too proud to ask. I learned today that he also made this beautiful wedding possible without asking for applause. So before we raise a glass to the bride and groom, I want to raise one to him. Nobody moved for a second. The silence was so complete I heard a fork touch a plate. Then a few guests turned. Then more. Evan stared at Lucas as if language had betrayed him. Claire's face lost its color. Denise stood halfway out of her chair and sat back down. Robert looked at the ceiling. The band leader, still holding Denise's card, slowly lowered it to his side. Lucas lifted his glass. To Mr. Whitaker, some people put their names on banners. Some people put their love into the bill and let others enjoy the day. The fallout began before the cake was cut. I saw Denise corner the planner near the hallway. Her mouth moved fast. The planner shook her head and held up a folder. Claire came over next, then Evan. From my table, I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. Approved payer, the planner said. Written consent. Then Denise said, that cannot be right. A few minutes later, Robert was on his phone, whispering sharply. Their perfect evening had met the part of paper that does not care about pride. By Monday morning, the panic had a shape. Anita called me at 9 with a careful voice that meant she had received angry messages. Denise had demanded that the trust cover all add-ons because guests had already consumed the food and wine. The venue refused to bill me without written consent. The florist sent a separate invoice to Claire for the extra installations she had ordered through her mother. The transportation company wanted payment from Robert for the private car. The total came to $22,600, due within 10 days. That afternoon, my niece Mia came to my house. She was Ellen's sister's daughter, 34 years old, and the closest thing I had to a daughter after Ellen died. Mia had been at the wedding, sitting with cousins near the middle of the room. She arrived with coffee and anger in her eyes, but she waited until I sat before she spoke. "Uncle Henry, did you really pay for all of it?" "Yes." "How much?" $86,400 for the approved wedding costs. She put the coffee down too hard. "And they put you at table 17? "Yes." "Did Evan know?" I looked at Ellen's picture on the shelf. He knew enough. Mia's voice softened. "Why did you not tell me?" "Because I was trying to honor your aunt. Aunt Ellen would not have wanted you humiliated." "No," I said. "But she would have wanted me to be careful with my anger." Mia sat beside me and took my hand. "Then let me be angry enough for both of us, for 5 minutes." I almost smiled. She asked to see the receipts not because she doubted me, but because she wanted facts before she stepped into a family storm. I showed her the vendor statements, the trust letters, the add-on clause, and the revised house fund memo Anita had drafted that morning. Mia read every page. When she finished, she said, "You are not cutting them off. You are teaching them the difference between help and entitlement." "I hope so," I said. "Then I am going to talk to Evan. Mia, do not burn the bridge." She stood and picked up her purse. "I am not burning it. I am putting weight limits on it." That evening, she invited Evan and Claire to her apartment and asked me not to come. I did not want a trial. I wanted my son to hear truth from someone who loved him and had no money in the fight. Mia told me later what happened. She placed copies of the receipts on her coffee table and let them sit there while Evan and Claire stared. "Your father paid for the venue, the food, the flowers, the music, the photos, and the tent," she told them. "He did it quietly because he thought quiet would protect your pride. You use that quiet to erase him." Claire said, "That is not fair." Mia answered, "Neither was table 17. Evan tried to say the seating was a misunderstanding." Mia opened the floor plan and pointed to his initials beside the final approval. Claire began crying, but Mia did not soften right away. She said, "Tears are not accountability. They are just the body catching up with what the conscience avoided." That sentence reached Evan. He covered his face with both hands. Claire whispered that her mother had pushed the changes, that everything had become about impressions, that she felt trapped by expectations. Mia listened and then asked, "Did you ever once tell Henry thank you without attaching another request to it?" Claire had no answer. The next morning, Evan came to my house alone. He looked younger than he had at the wedding, and more tired. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, the way he did as a teenager when he had dented the mailbox and needed to confess. I opened the door and waited. "Dad," he said, "I am ashamed." Those words did not fix everything, but they opened a door that pride had kept locked. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table where Ellen used to balance invoices. He cried then, quietly, not the kind of crying that asks to be watched. He said he had known I was helping, but not how much. He said he let Claire and Denise manage the wedding because it seemed easier than arguing. He admitted he had seen table 17 on the floor plan and told himself it did not matter. He said, "I made you small so my life would feel smooth." That was the first honest sentence he had given me in months. I told him I loved him. I also told him love would no longer arrive without boundaries. The house fund would remain in trust. He and Claire would pay the add-ons they authorized. If Denise wanted to claim she hosted the wedding, she could host the invoices that came from her choices. Evan nodded at each condition like a man accepting weather he had caused. Then he looked toward Ellen's chair. "I should have mentioned Mom." "Yes," I said. "Can I make that right?" "Not at the wedding," I said, "but maybe in the marriage." Claire came 3 days later. She brought the cedar box I had given her at the engagement party. She had finally opened it. Ellen's pendant rested inside, polished and small and brighter than I remembered. Claire's apology was not perfect. She blamed her mother once, caught herself, and started again. That mattered to me. She said, "I treated your silence like permission to disrespect you." I told her that was the closest thing to truth I had heard from her. She and Evan paid the $22,600 over the next 8 months. Denise complained to anyone who would listen, until most people got tired of listening. Robert quietly sent me a note that said he should have spoken up. I accepted it without inviting more. Lucas came by with his mother the following Sunday, and Marlene hugged me so hard my ribs complained. She said Ellen would have been proud of him. I told her Ellen would have packed him cookies. The first family dinner after all of it was uncomfortable, which is how honest things often begin. Evan arrived early and helped me set the table. Claire brought soup in my old slow cooker, the same one she had once rejected, and admitted she had asked Evan for the recipe. Mia watched from the counter with the expression of someone ready to interrupt foolishness before it grew legs. No one gave speeches. No one mentioned money until Evan raised his glass of water and said, "To Mom, who should have been named sooner." I looked at my son then and saw both men at once, the one who failed me and the one trying to come back. Forgiveness did not rush into the room like music. It entered slowly, pulled out a chair, and waited to see whether we would make space for it. We did. Money can pay for a room, but it cannot buy a place in someone's heart. Respect is proven in the moments when there is nothing left to gain, no audience to impress, and no advantage in being kind. The people who love you only when your name is useful may never know your worth, but the right person will remember it before you ever have to announce it. I paid for the wedding in silence, and the best man knew my name.